All right, guys, here we are. I can put it off no longer. I have to, at this point, talk about populations and sustainability. Let's begin. Way I see it, there's two parts to this. Guess what they are? Populations, where we look at the factors affecting population size, and then the next bit, which is the importance of, or the significance of, conservation and the importance of trying to maintain or use our natural resources in a sustainable way. So populations begins with, so if we just do this, all right, so the first part is populations, and it really begins with the growth, the population growth curve, not the bacterial growth curve, even though they do share similarities. And since this is a Module 6 paper, technically, it might be worth a look, and I guess cloning and biotech is also on this, so I would maybe have a look, compare, contrast with the bacterial population curve. Okay, so population growth curve, know what that looks like. I'll just do a basic version here, right? So we have a lag phase, we have an exponential phase. We do have a stationary phase that fluctuates about the carrying capacity, but we don't have the final death phase, because it's the population then reaches some kind of equilibrium with its surroundings, with its environment. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to detail every single thing, but know the stages of the growth curve, and ultimately we do get to this thing called the carrying capacity, because it's at the carrying capacity that we really look at which factors are impacting on the population, because obviously something's causing the population to not exponentially increase. So that then brings into the discussion the factors that can affect populations or population size. In relation to the growth curve, though, I would just make a point to remind you that the language you have to use to describe what's going on here is, please, in the context of birth and death rate. So however you want to describe it, well, you know, in biology you don't really have a lot of flexibility. You do have to, so when the growth is slow, what is that with respect to birth rate versus death rate? When the growth has stabilized, what is that with respect to birth rate versus death rate? Describe it in those terms. All right, that takes us to carrying capacity, and I believe, yeah, so the carrying capacity then allows us, or gives us an incentive or kind of reason to talk about limiting factors. Now, just like we talk about limiting factors in reactions, enzyme-controlled reactions, or photosynthesis, or metabolic reactions, similarly, the limiting factors are factors that affect the rate of growth of the population. Right? So populations, and then that's another main topic. What are the factors that affect a population? Okay, so the way I've divided this up is into abiotic and biotic. Okay, so we've got abiotic and biotic factors. All right, so of all the factors that affect the population size, we can categorize them as abiotic and biotic. All right, now abiotic, now these usually affect plants, but remember that plants are the producers for, usually the producers for entire ecosystems. So whatever affects the plants will eventually affect other species, the community, etc. So abiotic factors such as light, pH, well, these are non-living, right? So, I mean, yeah, I don't think I need to list them at this point. So abiotic factors are non-living, and I might just add that they primarily affect the plants, but not always. Not always. Okay, so we're talking about temperature or climate, things like humidity, soil pH. Okay, so there we have those, and then we have the biotic, which where the main part of our discussion is going to be. So what are biotic factors? Well, something that we're not going to talk too much about is disease. So that's the biotic factor, something that's caused by a living thing. Remember, disease is caused by pathogens, which are living organisms. And then we have another thing that we might not talk about too much is migration. Again, I've put this under a biotic factor, but it might not be. And then we've got our two topics that we will talk about in a bit more in depth, right? Which are competition and predation. Okay, right. Whew. Right, let's talk about competition then. Getting entangled in my wire. Competition. Right, so competition, remember, can be interspecific. Actually, let's put it the other way around. You'll see why in a bit. I'm sure you can't wait. Competition can be intra-specific and it can be interspecific. Okay? And competition is usually a result of overlapping niches. Did I put this? Yeah, I did. No. Yeah. Okay. Now, interspecific competition is when two different species, and I'll remind you about the idea of the niche, the ecological niche of organisms. That is how they take advantage or how they use their environment and the available resources and interact with other species. Okay, so the particular way in which they do that is called their niche, and organisms survive if they do things in a way that is unique to them. So they use resources that other species don't use. They occupy habitats that other species, or parts of habitats that other species don't make use of. If they do that, if they stick to that, then their population will grow because they will have enough shelter, enough food, etc. But when the niches overlap and the resources get limiting, then competition can arise. Okay, so interspecific is different species, remember? The competition between different species. It's because their niches are overlapping, right? And I think there's not too much to say on this, except that if there is such a thing as a competition between two different species in a particular habitat, in an area, then the competitive exclusion principle applies. Did I get that right? competitive exclusion. So what that will mean is that one of the species then will not be able to occupy that area. They will be excluded from that area by the other species which is better adapted and has the greater share of the resources. Okay. Competitive exclusion. So don't jump to saying that one species becomes extinct. Okay, because remember, any example is usually limited to one particular area, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that one of the species then gets excluded from the area or is eliminated from the area. Right? Competitive exclusion principle. Fine. One example of, or a kind of interspecific competition is in fact predation, because it does look at the interaction between two different species. Okay, but I wouldn't agree from the point of view that they're not really competing for the same resources, but their populations are connected to each other, and when one of their population gets very high, it does cause the other one to go down. So it is a competition in a sense, but not exactly. So predation is an example of predation is an interaction between two populations in the same area. And what happens in predation is, I think the best way to kind of think about this is the population graphs, where both of their populations fluctuate most likely around the carrying capacity, but the reason that they're going up and down is because, so say the black line is the predator, and I'll make a green line for the prey. Okay, so when the predator numbers are high, the prey numbers will be low. Okay. Okay, and if I remember this correctly, it's the predator line kind of follows the changes in the prey. Okay, now let me just check that I've got that right. Okay, so what would happen is that when the prey numbers are high, then the predators have lots of availability of their food source, and so their numbers increase. But then when the predator numbers get too high as a result of that, they consume a lot of the prey numbers decline, not enough food availability then for the predators, so the predator numbers decline. Okay, so just be aware and be able to talk through that story. Yeah, so there's a number of stages. It's important that you're able to explain that. Okay, yeah, so be able to explain the fluctuations or explain the changes, right? Fluctuations kind of implies randomness, and this is not random. Intraspecific, similar. Intraspecific is also, obviously intraspecific, all the organisms have exactly the same niche. And then when the availability of food is good, when the resources are available, then their numbers are high. When the numbers are high, the resources will be depleted more quickly, and so there might be increased competition, so the numbers decline, and this repeats over time. And so what we look at is a graph that goes up and down, right, around the carrying capacity. So that dotted line will be the carrying capacity if this is the population size and this is time. Okay, so again, be able to explain the changes that you see here in this graph. Okay, and if it comes down to data analysis, just be aware of what you're looking at and let that direct what you say about the data. Okay, so be able to explain the changes. Okay, again, don't forget. Do not forget, we are still looking at population, so don't forget to include the idea of death rate versus birth rate in all of these ideas. Okay, right, so that's that. What have we got next? Okay, so that takes us then to the sustainability part. I mean, is there anything here that really relates to other things? Disease, abiotic factors, limiting factors, abiotic. Well, don't know about anything else, but at least I spotted that mistake. Competition. Okay, right, so let's go then to sustainability. Okay, so yeah, the discussion about sustainability does begin with the idea of conservation. What is it? The idea of preservation. Yeah, so be able to define them, define that, but also be able to compare and contrast. Okay, but remember, we can just remove that. If ever you are asked to compare, you will be looking at, right, what are the similarities and what are the differences? Okay, let this be a reminder to always try your best to follow up on the command word in the exam questions. Okay, yeah, do not describe when you're asked to explain, don't explain when you're asked to compare. I guess it's a bit obvious at this point to say, but this idea of conservation, remember that was developed first in module 4. So make sure, if it has not been already, that you're looking at that. I mean, if you've got two connected topics on the same paper, most likely it's going to be part of the same question. Okay, so there is that, conservation. Reasons for right, and then we move on to sustainability proper, right? So the idea that, you know, one of the reasons why we're in a situation where we have to do a lot of conservation is because we have used our resources in an unsustainable way. Remember, in biodiversity, we looked at the factors affecting biodiversity, both species and genetic. The idea that overuse of those resources has resulted in a great loss of biodiversity. That's not just an ethical problem, that's actually a problem because we will eventually run out of our natural resources. Therefore, we must use our resources in a sustainable way, right? And so we have some examples of that. So sustainability. So what we have is, like, what is it? How is sustainability different to preservation, different to conservation, right? So sustainability, what are we trying to achieve with sustainability that's different from conservation? Is that clear in your head? Okay, so we've got the aims, and then we've got some examples, right? And the examples are fishing and timber production. Okay, there's not too much to say about fishing, but maybe just have a few points in relation to how this is done sustainably, right? In relation to timber, there's a bit more to it. I'm going to run out of space, aren't I? Right? In relation to timber, we have small scale and large scale. The small scale can be done in a sustainable way. The large scale is currently not sustainable. All right, so on the small scale, we have coppicing, right, rotational otherwise. We also have something called pollarding. On the large scale, we just have basic tree felling, just cutting trees down. Okay, this is unsustainable, this is sustainable. Coppicing, yeah. All right. And that takes us to the last bit, which either you're going to love this or you're going to hate it, but we are going to do this in a very, very basic way, okay? But we are going to look at ecosystem management. Is that what they call it? Ecosystem management, yeah. Because there's just too many small points that I would have to go through, and I don't have time for that, right? But in the specific ecosystems that you guys have to know about, and if there is a question, I'm sure if OCR have any morals at all, I'm sure they'll base the question on one of those ecosystems. Okay. Yeah, so in the ecosystem management, what I would advise you to do is the following, okay? So there are like 7 or 8 ecosystems that you need to know. So for each ecosystem, I hope you are able to tick these off in your head. For each ecosystem, make sure that you have some points relating to the following, okay? Okay, so for each ecosystem, write down key ecological features. Okay, so the key ecological features. Each ecosystem. All right, next, what has been the impact of human population growth on these ecosystems? Yeah, human population growth. So, what has been the human impact on the ecosystem? Again, each ecosystem, know some points. Next, if there are indigenous populations, what's the conflict there, right? So for the indigenous population, there's some interest in being able to exploit the resources, but as a result of maybe perhaps using those resources, there's now a kind of conflict with the wildlife or the ecosystem in the area. So what is the issue? What are the issues for the indigenous population? Issues for indigenous. Issues for indigenous population. Finally, for each ecosystem, know some examples of conservation actions. All right, so just some idea of what conservation is happening in each of the ecosystems. All right, so just very quickly, for each ecosystem, we want to know the main features of that ecosystem. We want to know what the impact of generally human population growth has been on that ecosystem. So what are the challenges essentially for the organisms or the wild animals or the ecosystem? Then next, we want to know then what are the issues for the indigenous population as a result of the human population growth. What are the conflicts that they face, you know, between their own interests and the interests of the wildlife. And finally then, what are the conservation efforts that are in place to try and address some of these issues. Okay, that is populations and sustainability. Guys, I hope this has come in time to be of some use. Good luck.